Get her out of the lobby. I don't care how, just make sure that black janitor isn't anywhere near this meeting." Gerald Monroe hissed into his collar mic, scanning the grand entrance of the Wellington Palace Hotel with the sharp-eyed paranoia of a man who knew everything could collapse in minutes. He adjusted his tie for the third time in as many minutes, trying to breathe past the spike of nerves building in his chest. The chandelier's crystal light spilled across the marble floor like a spotlight on a stage. Every surface gleamed. The staff stood polished and rehearsed just like he'd trained them. And outside the doors, the motorcade was arriving. Mr. Liang, the billionaire head of Lianhua International, controlled one of the largest hospitality portfolios in Asia, over 50 luxury properties across 8 countries. And now he was stepping foot into Gerald's hotel. This wasn't just about impressing a high-value guest. This was Gerald's shot at corporate. A seat in the boardroom, a promotion that would finally justify 2 decades of missed birthdays and 80-hour weeks. Gerald forced a winning smile onto his face as the glass doors opened and 6 sharply dressed associates swept in ahead of the man himself. Liang didn't smile. He didn't slow. He didn't even look at Gerald. He spoke in Mandarin. Fast, sharp, authoritative. Gerald's smile faltered. He fumbled for his phone, unlocking the app he'd been told was nearly human in its translation. He tapped and pointed it toward Mr. Liang, willing it to save him. The robotic voice that came out butchered the language so badly, one of Liang's associates visibly winced. "I'm terribly sorry," Gerald stammered. "But unfortunately, we don't have any Mandarin speakers on staff at the moment." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mr. Liang's eyes narrowed as he gripped the leather briefcase rumored to hold contracts worth more than the hotel's yearly revenue. One of his associates leaned toward him and muttered something under their breath. Behind the polished welcome desk, unnoticed and out of sight, a woman in a gray housekeeping uniform pushed a cleaning cart toward the service corridor. She didn't speak. She didn't stop. But for one fleeting second, her eyes met Mr. Liang's. No one paid attention to her. No one ever did. No one saw the framed degrees hanging inside her tiny studio apartment on the city's west side. No one knew that just 3 hours ago she'd been reading an academic journal on Chinese regional tax policy during her lunch break. Her name tag said Camille. Her ID badge said housekeeping. But her resume told a very different story. 3 hours earlier, the employee break room had turned into mission control. Gerald stood at the front like a general, walking a tight line between command and panic. "Mr. Liang arrives at 2:00 p.m. Sharp," he said, pacing back and forth in front of the vending machine. "He's flying in from Hong Kong, and if this goes well, we're looking at full regional partnership, expansion, global alignment, possibly even Shanghai." Heads nodded. The executive chef listed off the specialty Chinese dishes being prepared for lunch service. Engineering reported that the presidential suite's temperature had been set exactly to Liang's stated preference, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Guest services confirmed that a private tour of the city's high-end art venues was arranged. Everything was running like clockwork, except one lingering question. "Sir," the front desk manager raised her hand. "I've read that Mr. Liang prefers to speak Mandarin during business negotiations. Should we arrange a professional translator just in case?" Gerald shook his head. "I spoke with his assistant. She assured me he's fluent in English." He raised his phone. "And even if we hit a snag, our translation software's up to date. The new AI update is borderline flawless." He smiled like a man who'd already won the deal. No one questioned him. As the meeting wrapped, Gerald pulled Vanessa, the head of housekeeping, aside. "Keep your team invisible today," he said. "I want the rooms pristine, the carts out of sight, and not a single uniform in the lobby." "Understood," Vanessa gave a short nod. understood. Meanwhile, in the hotel's east wing, Camille Reed was smoothing out the duvet in the presidential suite. She worked quickly, silently, with the sort of quiet precision that only came from experience. At 33, she'd spent the last 4 years working in silence. Invisible labor in a world built for other people's spotlight. She aligned the pillows with military precision and adjusted the diffuser to the far end of the dresser, just out of direct sunlight. White tea and jasmine from Fujian province. Avoid heat exposure or the oils dissipate too fast, she murmured to no one in particular. On the edge of her cleaning cart, poking out from behind a folded towel, was a thick Mandarin English dictionary and a copy of Global Trade Law Quarterly. Her earbuds were still buzzing faint echoes from a language podcast she'd started before her shift. A voice was reading aloud changes to zoning laws in Shenzhen. The walkie clipped to her hip crackled. VIP arrival in 50 minutes. Clear the perimeter. Camille answered crisply, copy that. She gathered her materials, polished the sink faucet one last time, and turned toward the hallway. The silence of the corridor welcomed her like an old friend. She passed 2 executives without so much as a glance. She was invisible again. Just another uniform. Just another cart. And then, at exactly 2:00 p.m., the hotel's glass doors parted. A fleet of black Mercedes pulled into the drive tires, whispering across the stone like secrets. Security emerged, first scanning the entrance with the fluid efficiency of professionals used to moving VIPs in and out without disruption. Gerald stood at the ready, flanked by his executive team, the chandelier above, casting golden light on his polished shoes. Every guest had been rerouted, every camera angled, every second had led to this. The second car door opened, and Mr. Liang stepped out. Mid-60s, hair silver but sharp, tailored suit and flawless gray-red tie knotted with surgical precision. He walked with the presence of a man who didn't ask for attention, he simply drew it. Mr. Liang, Gerald said, stepping forward with his brightest smile, an outstretched hand, welcome to the Wellington. Liang gave a quick nod, brushed past the handshake, and began speaking. In Mandarin. Rapid, authoritative, direct. Gerald's smile froze. The app wouldn't save him this time. Off to the side of the lobby, just beyond the marble columns, Camille watched from behind a potted orchid. Her cart stood still, her hands folded, her ears open. She understood every word. Liang wasn't complimenting the lobby's design. He wasn't impressed with the lighting or the welcome staff. He was concerned. And the worst part, he was right. 3 hours before Mr. Liang's words echoed through the marble lobby, Camille Reed had been crouched beside the utility sink in the east wing, tightening a loose wheel on her cleaning cart. Her phone buzzed beside her, a notification from her loan servicer blinking with cold precision. Minimum payment overdue. Again. She dismissed the alert, slid the phone back into her pocket, and stood up. 4 years ago, she had returned from China with a master's degree in East Asian linguistics and international business. Fluent in Mandarin, conversational in Cantonese and Japanese. An alumna of Tsinghua University with honors. She had dreams of working as a global consultant, bridging East and West, connecting investors to cultural fluency, advising firms on everything from market trends to etiquette. She submitted 287 applications. Got 8 interviews, 0 offers. The closest she'd come was an internship with a multinational group cut short after funding was pulled. Another company told her she was overqualified for entry-level, under-networked for management. One interviewer asked how she'd managed to attend a school like that. Her degree had cost her nearly $120,000. Her dignity, a bit more. The Wellington Palace had been a temporary job, a placeholder, something stable while she paid off loans, built savings, kept trying. She never imagined 4 years later she'd still be pushing the same cart through the same hallways, reciting complex legal terms in Mandarin under her breath while scrubbing floors. Back then, Camille had believed hard work would be enough. She'd learned otherwise. At her last hotel job, she'd helped a group of Japanese guests who were lost in the elevator corridor. She'd translated, escorted them, even booked their dinner. Her manager had pulled her aside after. "Don't do that again," he'd said flatly. Guests get uncomfortable when service staff act too educated. She never made that mistake again. Since then, she'd played the part. Head down, hands busy, voice soft. Her skills became her secret. But secrets, no matter how carefully buried, eventually find the light. As she passed the conference level on her way back to the service elevator that afternoon, she caught fragments of a rehearsal presentation. Gerald was pacing the room, gesturing at slides in English. Flow charts, revenue projections, branding strategies. But no Mandarin. No references to Chinese markets. No acknowledgement of cultural nuance. Camille paused briefly just out of sight. She recognized the pattern. Western assumptions dressed up as universal luxury. She'd seen it in case studies and real-world deals that failed to land. It was the kind of presentation built by people who never bothered to learn what their investors actually valued. She kept walking. At 1:53 p.m., she was assigned to check the atrium restrooms before VIP arrival. Routine, quick, invisible. But when she stepped out into the hallway, she heard the voice. That voice, sharp, precise, Mandarin. She followed it instinctively. Not out of nosiness, but the way a violinist follows the strain of a familiar melody. She arrived at the edge of the lobby just in time to see Gerald's second attempt at app translation spit out the phrase, "Foreign mooncake policy tree, important tax question now." One of Mr. Liang's assistants stifled a laugh. Another shook his head. Camille's heart dropped into her stomach. She couldn't hear Gerald's voice, but she could feel his panic. The stiff posture, the too fast blinking, the sudden sheen of sweat on his forehead. She knew that look. She'd seen it before on executives who'd thought they were ready right up until they weren't. Liang said something to Ms. Chow, his associate, in clipped Mandarin. Camille heard it clearly. "Perhaps we overestimated their readiness." Those 6 words hit harder than any rejection email ever had. She stood still for a long moment, tucked in the shadows behind a lobby pillar, pretending to adjust a picture frame on the wall. Her cart sat beside her, a silent testament to everything she'd learned to suppress. The weight of invisibility pressed down on her shoulders again. She could help. She knew she could. She could step out right now, speak up, and save the deal. But would it matter? Would they listen? Or would she be scolded again for being too visible in a place that demanded she disappear? Her pulse throbbed behind her ears. Then she heard it, Gerald's voice, cracking through the hallway. "Do we have anyone at all on staff who speaks a word of Mandarin?" Camille didn't move. Not yet. She just stood there, breathing in the moment. She'd spent years preparing for rooms like this. Now the room was collapsing and the door was cracked open. The question was no longer whether she was ready. It was whether she would be seen. The executive conference room was quiet, but not calm. The temperature had risen noticeably since the meeting began, despite the climate control settings. The air was heavy with discomfort, frustration, and the metallic tang of impending failure. Gerald Monroe stood near the center of the room, flanked by his most senior staff, his CFO sales director, and the food and beverage manager, each of them clutching leather-bound presentation packets that had gone almost entirely ignored. Across the table sat Mr. Liang and his team. Not one of them had opened their folders. Not one had made eye contact with the presenters. Liang had instead spent the better part of the last 20 minutes speaking in fluid, increasingly pointed Mandarin to his associates, who nodded, took notes, and occasionally glanced at Gerald with expressions ranging from puzzled to disapproving. Ms. Chow, his assistant, had been offering occasional translations, but even those came delayed, filtered, and watered down. Mr. Liang is inquiring about local zoning restrictions for vertical development in this district, she said at one point. And also how recent tax reforms might impact foreign investors, particularly those operating hospitality properties connected to retail centers. Gerald blinked, caught off guard. That's specific, he said, forcing a tight smile. Let me get back to you on that. I'm sure our legal team could. But Liang had already moved on. Another question. Another layer deeper. Camille, who had quietly positioned herself near the hallway door outside, could hear the cadence of his voice rising. It wasn't anger. It was precision. Challenge. He was testing them. Gerald tried again with the translation app, speaking into it, slowly hoping to regain control. Please ask Mr. Liang to clarify. His concerns about vertical tax structure, Liang responded. The app processed the audio. The screen read, Chicken Tower Hotel Mooncake, important next question now. Camille exhaled sharply. It wasn't quite a laugh. It wasn't quite despair. It was something in between. Inside the room, one of Liang's associates couldn't hold back a chuckle. Mr. Liang said nothing, but his jaw tightened slightly. He exchanged a glance with Ms. Chow that Camille had seen before. It meant, this meeting is wasting our time. Gerald cleared his throat. Perhaps we could take a short recess, 5 minutes. Just to regroup and bring in the right people to answer these excellent, very technical questions. He didn't wait for approval. He backed out of the room like a man escaping a burning building. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Gerald spun around. Options. Now. His team gathered in the hallway like nervous schoolchildren. The controller raised a hand halfway. I can speak to state-level tax credits, he offered, but the international implications... He trailed off. The IT manager spoke next. The app is failing because it wasn't trained on business vocabulary. It's meant for travel basics, directions, menus, not international zoning law. I gathered that thanks, Gerald snapped. Vanessa, the head of housekeeping, emerged from around the corner with a clipboard in hand. Should I redirect Camille to another floor? She's still assigned near the lobby. No, Gerald said quickly. Just make sure she stays out of sight. He pulled out his phone again. Where the hell is that interpreter service? His assistant appeared, phone pressed to her ear. Still checking. Their Mandarin specialist is out sick. They're trying to find a backup, but how long? 30 minutes minimum. Gerald stared at her. Mr. Liang gave me 5. Camille could hear every word. She stood just behind the hallway column cart parked neatly beside her, a duster still clutched in her hand like a prop she'd forgotten how to use. She listened as Gerald's team tossed out bad ideas, pull in a cousin who once took Mandarin in college, hand Mr. Liang a printed presentation in English, send a follow-up email summarizing their points. Every suggestion was worse than the last. Camille's hand tightened on the duster. This wasn't just a language barrier. It was a cultural one, an operational one, a credibility collapse playing out in real time. She had studied this in graduate school. Entire case studies had been built around failures like this. She had predicted exactly this kind of moment in her thesis. And now it was unfolding in front of her, and she was watching it die on the conference room table. She looked at the decorative molding she'd been dusting the gleam of it under her fingers. She'd cleaned that same section twice already. She wasn't working. She was hiding. Hiding behind caution, behind memory, behind fear. Her last job had punished her for overstepping. Her whole career, what little there was of it, had trained her to stay small. But small didn't save people. Not today. She set the duster down, slipped off her gloves, smoothed the front of her uniform with one breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped toward the door. Inside the conference room, Mr. Liang was already standing. His associates were quietly collecting their folders. Miss Chow was preparing to suggest they end the meeting early. Gerald wasn't back yet. The door opened, and Camille Reed walked in. All conversation stopped the moment Camille entered. 12 heads turned. Silence dropped over the room like glass. She didn't flinch. Gerald, arriving just behind her, nearly collided with her back. "What are you doing?" he hissed, face paling. "Get out of here, we're in the middle of a—" Camille turned her eyes away from him and looked directly at Mr. Liang. She spoke calmly, fluently, in flawless academic Mandarin. "Respected Mr. Liang," she said, voice, even posture straight, "I couldn't help overhearing your concerns regarding recent changes to municipal tax codes and their impact on vertically integrated hotel retail zoning allowances. If it's helpful, I'd be happy to offer some clarification or assist with translation." The room froze. Mr. Liang blinked, slowly, then tilted his head. Camille saw the flicker of recognition of surprise behind his expression. For the first time that day, his face softened. He responded in Mandarin, not slowly, not kindly. He was testing her. His tone shifted toward a specific regional dialect. He layered in business terms, legal phrasing, obscure policy language. Camille didn't flinch. She responded immediately, answering with precise terminology, citing relevant ordinances, and drawing direct comparisons between the local regulations and policies recently adopted in second-tier Chinese cities. As she spoke, Mr. Liang's associates sat straighter. One of them reached for a pen. Miss Chow looked stunned, her poised expression cracking just slightly at the edges. Gerald stood motionless near the door, frozen somewhere between disbelief and humiliation. Mr. Liang finally smiled. A real one. He switched to English. "Tell me," he said, gesturing to her uniform. "How does someone with your qualifications come to be working in this capacity?" Camille opened her mouth to answer, but Gerald jumped in, snapping out of his stupor. "Thank you, Miss." "I'm sorry, what was your name again?" "Camille Reed," she said. "Yes, Miss." "Reed." He forced a thin smile. "Why don't you join us just briefly to help with translation until our professional interpreter arrives?" He gestured toward the back of the room, as if ushering her toward the periphery. Camille's expression didn't change. She took a seat at the table. Mr. Liang watched the exchange carefully. Leaning in slightly, he asked her in Mandarin about her educational background. She answered concisely, describing her master's program, her thesis on East-West hospitality integration, and her years studying cross-cultural business protocols in Beijing. Gerald cleared his throat. "Let's stay focused on the investment proposal, shall we?" he said. "Ms. Reed, please let Mr. Liang know we'll be resuming our presentation now." Camille translated the message. Mr. Liang didn't respond. He continued speaking directly to her. His interest had shifted. The formal pitch was irrelevant now. He had found something better, something real. Gerald tried again. "Ms. Reed, kindly explained to Mr. Liang that the next section outlines our 5-year growth forecast." But Mr. Liang raised a hand and cut him off without looking at him. He was speaking to Camille. The conversation deepened into market analysis, customer preference alignment, global traveler behavior, and brand positioning. Camille answered every question, not just translating, but contributing. She outlined a gap in Wellington's approach to Chinese luxury travelers: lack of multi-generational suite options, no dedicated tea service space, no integration with WeChat Pay or Alipay. Liang nodded approvingly. His associates took notes. One of them asked a follow-up. Camille answered without hesitation. Gerald stood at the head of the table holding a laser pointer no one cared about anymore. This wasn't his meeting anymore. Finally, Liang sat back and looked directly at Gerald. "In my companies," he said in English, "people like Ms. Reed do not push cleaning carts. They lead divisions." Gerald's face flushed. "She's housekeeping staff," he said, "though clearly she has some unusual qualifications." "Unusual," Liang echoed. "Or undiscovered?" The question sliced through the room like ice. Gerald tried to recover. "Of course, we'll be reviewing her credentials immediately. We take internal talent development very seriously." Mr. Liang raised an eyebrow. "No, Mr. Monroe. You take appearances seriously, and you assume capability wears a suit." He turned back to Camille. "My company is always looking for individuals who can bridge cultures and markets," he said, offering her a business card, unlike the ones he'd handed out earlier. It was solid black with gold lettering. A personal contact card. A symbol. Camille accepted it with both hands, bowing slightly, as tradition dictated. Gerald looked like he'd swallowed broken glass. Then Liang turned to the room at large. "I would like Ms. Reed to continue participating in this meeting, not as a translator, but as a collaborator. I believe she has more to offer than anyone else here." No one disagreed. Camille didn't say anything at first. She simply looked across the table at Mr. Liang, nodded once, with measured gratitude, and turned back to the discussion, picking up the conversation as if she'd always belonged there. For the next 40 minutes, the investment pitch transformed from a stiff, faltering presentation into a living, breathing conversation. Camille didn't just translate, she contextualized. She didn't just interpret, she offered insights, anticipated concerns, and redirected Gerald's vague promises into concrete data-backed answers. Mr. Liang's team stopped checking their watches. His tone shifted from skeptical to engaged. The presentation slides remained untouched on the projector screen. No one cared. By the time they wrapped, Mr. Liang leaned forward, folded his hands neatly, and said through Ms. Chow's now unnecessary translation, "The Wellington has potential." He looked at Gerald. "But your talent management requires urgent modernization." Gerald swallowed hard, trying to nod and smile at the same time. "We appreciate the feedback, Mr. Liang. We'll certainly be taking today's insights to heart." Mr. Liang rose, extending his hand to Camille. "Ms. Reed, I hope you'll consider sending me your resume. My companies are always looking for bridge builders." I appreciate that Sir Camille replied with the composure of someone who had been overlooked long enough to know exactly what being seen feels like. As Liang and his team left the room, pausing only briefly to shake hands with Wellington's shell-shocked executive team, Gerald stood in awkward silence. Camille began gathering her notes already halfway to the door when he called out to her. "Ms. Reed, wait." She turned. His voice was quieter now. The performance had slipped away, leaving something closer to sincerity, though still tinged with discomfort. "I didn't know about your qualifications, about any of this." Camille didn't smile. "It was on my resume. Page 2, under education." Gerald winced. "Right, I'll make sure. HR revisits that immediately." She nodded once, then walked out. 3 weeks later, the the Wellington Palace Hotel issued an internal memo announcing a newly created position, Director of International Guest Experience. The memo praised cross-cultural strategy, global guest insight, and hidden talents within our team. It didn't name Camille explicitly, but the staff all knew. Camille's gray housekeeping uniform was replaced by a tailored navy blazer. Her practical shoes upgraded to low heels that clicked confidently against the same marble floor she once polished. Her new office, carved out of a former storage suite, now held 2 framed documents, her master's diploma from Tsinghua University and Mr. Liang's personal business card. She'd accepted the promotion, not because Gerald finally noticed her, but because the work needed to be done. And this time, she'd do it with her name on the door. One morning, as she passed the main lobby, she saw a young man from maintenance adjusting a spotlight near the chandelier. Their eyes met. She remembered his name from the staff development survey, the one she'd launched her first week in the new role. He spoke 3 languages, was working on an engineering degree. Invisible, just like she'd been. Camille smiled. He smiled back. Later that week, she stood before a group of 20 staff members gathered in one of the hotel's conference rooms, uniforms of all types, housekeeping, security, front desk, bellhops. Some nervous, some curious. She clicked the projector. On screen, a simple phrase recognized the whole person behind the uniform. "This is the first session of our Hidden Talents program," she said, voice steady. "Each of you indicated on your survey that you have skills, languages, education experience not currently used in your role. We're going to change that." She paused. "Because 3 weeks ago I was cleaning baseboards outside a conference room while a multi-million-dollar opportunity unraveled. And I almost stayed silent. The room was still. I wasn't hired for what I knew. But I chose to speak anyway. And because I did, everything changed." As the presentation ended, Camille looked out at the faces in the room. Each one carried a story. Each one deserved to be seen. Down in the lobby, the staff greeted a new group of international investors. This time, the welcome packet included translated materials in 5 languages. There were traditional tea service options in every suite. The mobile payment terminals now accepted Alipay. The chandeliers still sparkled. The marble still gleamed. But something else had changed. Camille Reed, once invisible, now stood at the center of the hotel's transformation. Not as a symbol, but as a reminder. That brilliance can wear any uniform, and that sometimes all it takes is the courage to speak up and the willingness to listen when someone finally does.